Welcome to this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. To say it was an interesting week in the trade might be putting it mildly. Maybe a little bit of a pullback in the sense that we kind of focused off of Ukraine and Russia for just a few moments to look at some USDA reports. We'll also take a look at what's been happening weather-wise, but again, refocusing as well as what's going to happen as we move forward with spring planting, fertilizer concerns, and more. That's on this week's episode.
It may be small, but this little bean fuels a lot of power. It powers a food industry as a top source of protein. It's a fuel that powers diesel engines with fewer emissions. It powers a state economy and bottom lines. And it powers the rest of the world as a top Nebraska export. Yeah, it may be small, but we're finding more ways for this little bean to power Nebraska.
And welcome back. As you can see, we're being joined today by Sue Martin. She's with Ag and Investment out of Clarion, Iowa, and Jeff Peterson with Heartland Farm Partners. And interesting trading week. We had a bunch of different reports coming out besides quarterly stocks. We had the Hogs and Pigs report. And Sue, I wanted to start out with you. As you and I were talking earlier on Friday during the Fontenelle Final Bell, the weather took a quick synopsis pullback from the drought that's there, but it definitely is still a factor, and the wheat market has not forgot about that. It's dry.
It's very dry. And of course, when you look at Montana, it is so dry in Montana that I'm hearing cattle producers, cow-calf men, say that if they don't see some rain fairly soon, they're going to end up having to send cows to market, to slaughter, and then push the calves to the auction barns and feedlots. So it's very dry in the north, but then also we're very dry in parts of Oklahoma, Texas, but especially on in through Kansas as well.
Lots of fires that are burning out there. Do you see that taking a toll on any early planting for those guys?
Well, it may. I think that the one thing I've been hearing from various producers in, like, for example, Kansas, they're telling me that on the backside of this wheat, we may see some beans being planted and rather than corn. And so I think that's, the wheat in the western part of the state looks pretty poor. And they're worried about not even being able to get enough water for irrigation.
Which is crazy. Well, Jeff, we had a lot of reports that came out this week, including the prospective planting acres for corn. What are you thinking about the corn ending stocks and how things are looking so far?
It's interesting. So we like to take those acres and then start kind of plugging them in. And if we just take them and plug them into just the supply and demand numbers out of the outlook meeting, so we, adjust our acres to 89.5 million, and that'd give us a production number about 14.826 billion, which that's not any too much. Even if we just use USDA's demand numbers from the outlook meeting, that would bring us in with basically an ending stock number of about 1.45 billion. And so that's snugging it up. But then we've taken a look and said, okay, but what if we make some other adjustments? And what we've done is we've went in, we still think we're going to end up bringing in the demand number stronger on the 2021 crop for corn. So we said, what if we adjust the acres? And then what if we come in and instead of having a 1.44 billion beginning stock number for this 2022 crop, what if we bring it down to say like a 1.2? And that's pretty aggressive amount of additional exports, which I'm not sure we can hit that number, but if we would, and then by doing that, we'll bring our export number up in the 2022 to about 2.7 billion. That'd take us down to about a 909 million bushel ending stock number, which would be a 6% stocks to use. So, and that's using a 181 yield. And I agree that we can start off with a 181 yield, but Sue did a great job talking about some of the dry conditions that are out there that you'd asked her about. And that could be a tall order. We'll start there, but if we just pulled that production number back 3 bushels the acre, all of a sudden you take another, couple 100 million, 250 million bushels off of that. And we can see why corn acted as it did after we had the report. Now we had a little bit of an adjustment today, but that's kind of what the corn numbers are looking like to us, Susan.
All right, Sue, what about for you as you look at these numbers from a soybean perspective? What could we see as we move forward?
Well, I think that Farmers maybe didn't get enough fertilizer bought last fall. The concern is this is going to go all the way in through 2023's crop as well. But when I look at the soybean crop, I think there's two things that could go on as we move into the June report. One is that maybe we see these bean acres hold together, as the USDA reported. But another situation I see is farmers farming, especially in maybe some areas where like South Dakota, maybe the western side of Nebraska, where farmers decide they're going to farm the crop insurance. And they put in, the acres, which will seem deceiving to us on the report, but they'll plant the acres, but with less plant population. And we might see that in more areas than just that area there. But they put in lower plant populations, and then so they save some money on seed. But in the meantime, they also cut back on fertilizer. And I agree with that. 181 yield on corn, it's trend line, but it's a record yield too. So that's pretty tough in a year like this when the forecasts are really strongly suggesting we're going to have a hot, dry summer. That's pretty tough. Well, beans handle heat and dryness a little better than corn. But again, when you look at the problems they had in South America on their bean crop, we have to produce a good bean crop too.
Well, I know that there's been a push for folks to farm fence row to fence row this year because of everything that's globally happening. Do you agree or disagree with that thought, Sue?
Well, we've kind of been a fence row to fence row planting situation, especially in Iowa. But I will say, if you looked at where the acres were dropping and bean acres were going up, it was all of your major corn producing states. It was kind of interesting. I don't know, it's interesting in our area here. I've talked to farmers and a lot of them have not changed their rotations.
Okay.
But if they're a larger farmer, a lot of them had their fertilizer bought ahead. So it's still up for grabs. This report, I think, put a lot of emphasis on and volatility on the June final plantings report. That report's going to be really volatile, I think.
Very much so. Well, as we continue here with the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, it's being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. So, Jeff, we talked about the corn ending stocks. What are your thoughts on the soybean side?
On the soybean side, as we dig into those numbers, and Sue had some wonderful points there to bring up, and I do think there's a lot of questions out there on acres yet, and I think what she laid out is a very possible scenario in some areas. If conditions are a little bit tougher than what we'd expect to see, whether it be a little bit wetter, maybe in a few pockets, or too drier in others, we will have some that will physically think about the crop insurance side. As we took basically the numbers coming out of the prospective planning report and plugged them in, we took a look at what the ending stock number, that 285 coming out of the 2021 report for WASDE, 285 million bushels ending stocks. We said, what if, because of the things we have going on out there, maybe the demand wise, maybe we have a few more exports. What if we brought that down to 215? And that's a pretty tall order. I don't know if that can be achieved, but if we did use it, and then we said, what if we also brought up the exports in the 2022 crop? What if we bring that up to about 2.3 billion on the export side? That brings us in at kind of a 197 type ending stock number. Now, I think we're a little too aggressive there, but the other side of that gets to be starting off with a over 51 bushel yield. I agree with Sue that could be tough to achieve. And so all of a sudden, I think what it does, it just makes it very important that the U.S. has a very good crop. And it also makes it very important that safrinha crop is really good as we come out of, in Brazil, especially if Ukraine has some problems, not getting all their acres planted, which it sure looks like they're going to have that type of problem.
I find it interesting that the world just kind of forgot that South America has a crop growing that we're getting ready to plant, as everybody focuses on what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And I want to talk to both of you about that. First of all, Jeff, where are we at planting progress for those in Ukraine?
Yeah, so what we've seen, and this came out of a report, Reuters reported it, and just looking at the Ukraine Deputy Ag Secretary is suggesting they've got about, of their spring planted crop, about 988,000 acres of that planted. And if you would say that before Russia invaded Ukraine, maybe their spring crop was going to be about 37 million acres. That would be about 2.6%. Now, obviously, they won't get all their acres planted, so they probably have a larger percentage of that planted because of they'll end up shooting for less acres. But that's what we're seeing so far, Susan.
Sue, what are your thoughts on what's been happening in Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think that the farmer is trying very hard, and I think he's being given incentives to try to push to plant by the Ukrainian government. But I think I have to agree with Jeff. I think there's going to be issues there to get that crop planted. We all know that won't get planted entirely. So the question is just what percentage do they not get planted? And then on top of it, when you start hearing that the Russian military is going after Odessa and grain facilities and export facilities, that's a little concerning because it shows that they don't care about the food side factor of Ukraine at this time.
Well, in Iceland, I've heard that they're putting mines out in the water, which is going to cause for the unavailability of ships to come in and try to get grain or try to get grain out.
Well, that has been happening. I think that right now, I think we have to kind of keep an eye on just what Russia's really going after. And it may be that they're after the controlling Odessa. And I've read where if they control Odessa, they'll control Ukraine.
All right. Well, it was a fast show this week. It went by quick. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us. As a reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. That's this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup.